The soft glow of the kitchen light cast long shadows as I sliced an orange. It was a mundane Tuesday, a simple act in a house that was, until that moment, my home. My wife Alara was in the shower, her voice a cheerful melody filtering from the bathroom. I reached for my phone, planning to put on a podcast, but her phone lay face up on the counter beside mine. 7 text messages. A tiny red notification balloon against the screen. I told myself not to look, that it was a violation of trust, but my fingers had a mind of their own. One tap, then another, and the world I knew shattered into a million pieces. The messages were from a man named Jeremy, a coworker I'd never met. The words were a vile poison. Can't stop thinking about the elevator. You're trouble. Another read, I dreamt about your dress. You in it? You out of it? The final message was a blurry thumbnail, a photo she'd sent him. I didn't click it. I didn't need proof. The words were enough. My hand, holding the paring knife, began to tremble. The orange, a perfect sphere of citrus, rolled off the counter and landed with a soft thud on the floor. Alara emerged from the bathroom, humming, a towel wrapped around her hair. She smiled at me, a brilliant, blinding smile that felt like a lie. She poured her coffee and without looking up said, Lyle, can we stop making everything about you? You're not my priority right now. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I stood there, paralyzed, a strange, polite smile on my face. It was the same smile I'd given my boss when he'd told me my position was being eliminated. My wife, the woman I had built a life with, had just eliminated me. I placed the knife on the sink, the cold metal a stark contrast to the heat of my rage. Then don't make me your afterthought either, I said, my voice shockingly calm. Alara's smile vanished, her eyes wide with confusion, but I was already gone, walking to the bedroom. I didn't pack much, just a few shirts, my passport, my watch. I grabbed the dog's leash, a final, cruel gesture, but left the dog. Alara loved him. Let her have something left to love. By the time she realized what was happening, I was already on the road. The roads were slick with rain, and the radio was broken, leaving me alone with my thoughts and her ghost. Her voice echoed in my head, a litany of insults and gaslighting. Lyle, you're just sensitive. Lyle, you make everything heavier than it is. I used to think she was just honest, but now I knew the truth. She was the author, and I was just a character she had written out of her story. I stopped at a dusty diner about 40 miles out. The checkerboard floor, the smell of stale coffee, the bad lighting, it was all a blur. I ordered a burger I couldn't eat, just to have an excuse to sit. My phone buzzed, and I almost ignored it. But then another message came through, a voicemail. Not for me, but for Jeremy. Alara's voice, sharp and venomous, filled the small space of the booth. He finally left, she said, her voice dripping with relief. I'm actually relieved. I thought he'd cry or beg or something pathetic. That was the moment something in me clicked. Not a crack, not a break, but a cold, mechanical click. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't angry. I was detached. I stood up, left a 20 on the table, and walked out of the diner without my food. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a carefully constructed play. And I was the fool who didn't know he was on stage. I drove to Jeremy's apartment, a tired-looking brick building a few miles away. I'd driven by it once before, when Alara said she was at a team-building event nearby. Now, I knew the real story. I parked on a side street and waited. It wasn't long before I saw her. She stepped out of a rideshare, wearing the black jacket I'd bought her for Christmas. She walked up to the door and, without a knock, let herself in with a key. I waited a few more minutes before I got out of the car. I wasn't thinking like a husband anymore, or even like a man. I was a surveyor of wreckage, a forensic investigator of a life burned to the ground. I walked up to the door. It was unlocked. I didn't go in. I just turned the knob and stepped 1 foot into the shadows. I heard her laughter, loud and unfiltered, the kind she hadn't given me in years. And then I heard his voice. God, it's nice not having to sneak around anymore. My heart didn't shatter. There was no rage. There was just a bizarre, unsettling clarity. I pulled out my phone, hit record, and captured the moment. The audio was sent to my personal email, a record of the truth, a reminder that I wasn't just imagining things. I closed the door quietly, returned to my car, and drove away. While they were toasting to my erasure, I was on the phone with a private notary, a woman named Vera, a friend I hadn't spoken to in years. I transferred my business shares, froze our shared accounts, and scheduled mail forwarding. My next step wasn't about revenge, it was about disruption. Vera was a specialist in off-grid relocations, a woman who helped people disappear legally and permanently. She gave me 72 hours, enough time for me to dissolve my digital footprint. We started with the phones, deleting apps and resetting accounts. Then came the harder work, closing bank accounts, memberships, and leases. I was still legally alive, but to anyone looking, I was gone. Days turned into weeks. Alara started with cryptic posts on social media. "Finally free," one caption read. "Some people are just meant to be lessons, not lifelines." I felt no pain, only pity. This wasn't power, it was panic. She was cracking, not because of what I had done to her, but because of what I wasn't doing. I wasn't begging, I wasn't angry, and I wasn't there. That kind of absence, I was learning, was louder than any goodbye. Then came the final move. The house. She thought she still had it. But what she didn't know was that I had signed it over to my mother's lawyer, Rory, weeks ago. One Saturday night, as she sat in her robe with a half-empty glass of wine, there was a knock at the door. It was Rory, a calm man with kind eyes. He presented a folded sheet of paper, a deed transfer. "My name's Rory Cadell," he said. "You may want to contact your husband for clarification. Actually, sorry, ex-husband." She slammed the door in his face, of course. She grabbed her phone, but my number was out of service. She checked her email, but there was nothing. No forwarded documents, no digital trail. She had always played emotional chess, never bothering to read the fine print. And in the silence that followed, I knew she was finally understanding the truth. She hadn't anticipated any of this. By the next morning, she was gone, leaving the dog, the wine, and a single post-it note on the fridge. "If you wanted me to hurt, you won." But she was still wrong. This wasn't about hurting her. This was about ending the conversation. I hadn't disappeared because I was a coward. I disappeared because I was finally done with her story. Months passed. I was living in a small, quiet town up north, a place with rivers that didn't care about phone reception and mountains that caught fire in the fall. I had a simple job, a modest home, and a newfound sense of peace. I started writing in a leather notebook, not about the past, but about the present. And one morning, I woke up, brewed coffee, and realized I hadn't thought about her in days. I didn't hate her. I didn't miss her. I had just finally let go. The final message came months later, an email from an address I didn't recognize. "You think this is over?" It read. 5 words, no signature, no punctuation. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The conversation was already over. I had left without needing to be right, and in doing so, I had finally found my peace. That was the true ending. Not revenge, not destruction, but the simple, beautiful fact that I was no longer a character in her story. I was the author of my own,